On this Sunday night, changing tactics in Ukraine. Russia targets food and gas supplies in the West as officials warn of a plan to split Ukraine in two. And the Kremlin fires back after Biden's heated remarks against Vladimir Putin.
It could complicate matters going down the road.
Touchdown in Rome. Canada's Indigenous delegation arrives in Vatican City.
Unbelievable. I don't know, like I'm in a daze.
We are on the ground in Italy with the group in search of accountability.
The only time an apology is going to come is if the Catholic Church feels that it's back into a corner.
And oh, Canada, hitting home pitch in hopes of clinching a spot in the World Cup for the first time in over 3 decades.
Global National. Reporting tonight, Dallas Flexhaw.
Fresh images from Ukraine's port city of Mariupol show the utter ruins it is now in. Ukraine's deputy prime minister today saying the southeastern hub simply does not exist anymore. Good evening and thank you for joining us. Ukrainian officials say Russian attacks have destroyed 85% of Mariupol, as some say it is now only a matter of time before it falls to the Russians.
You have the situation in Mariupol, which has become a bit of a Ukrainian Alamo at this point in time. It's fighting to the last defender and pinning down multiple Russian battalions in so doing, very heroically. But ultimately, it looks as if it's going to have to collapse. It's going to be taken.
Meantime, we are learning more about the destruction left behind after rockets landed yesterday in Lviv. A fuel depot and military factory were targeted in the fiercest attacks yet on the western city, which up until this weekend was considered a safe haven for Ukrainians fleeing the war. As David Akin reports, Ukraine says Russia is now changing its strategy as it looks to split the country apart.
More than 20,000 people once lived here in Volnovakha, a small town in Ukraine's eastern Donetsk region. Now, it's a ghost town, nearly destroyed by Russian munitions. And now, Ukraine's military intelligence directorate says Russia is planning to split Ukraine in two, with what the Ukrainians called the Korean scenario. But while the Korean peninsula was frozen into its north-south configuration by war in the 1950s, Russia is aiming for west-east, folding regions like Donetsk into some kind of new country. Ukrainian military forces are doing everything they can to prevent that. And on Sunday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky released another video asking the West yet again that his military forces be given tanks and planes. And he angrily taunted NATO powers who have so far ignored those requests, saying, so who is running the Euro-Atlantic community? Is it still Moscow? Because of threats? Zelensky's demand for help came after Russian cruise missiles hit a fuel storage facility in Lviv. No deaths have been reported, but firefighters spent all night putting the blaze out. A Ukrainian government official said this is a new twist to Russia's attacks, aiming at fuel and food storage centers, which would force the Ukraine government to disperse stocks of both. Zelensky also had a warning for Putin that his invasion and the continued and indiscriminate shelling of civilians was sowing a deep hatred among Ukrainians for the Russian people. Putin, too, had his own video congratulating members of the Russian National Guard for what Putin called their professionalism and bravery in operations in Ukraine. Western intelligence sources, though, say Russia has lost as many as 15,000 troops killed in just 4 weeks of war, including 7 generals, though Russia has admitted none of those deaths. NATO leaders believe those kind of steep losses could force Putin to take even more dangerous and radical steps as the war enters its second month. David Akin, Global News.
The White House is walking back comments made by Joe Biden during his fiery speech to the world last night, where he denounced Vladimir Putin. The U.S. president seemed to suggest a regime change was in order for Russia as he promised continued support for Ukraine. Administration officials now say those comments were ad-libbed and that there is no plan to pursue that. But that hasn't stopped the Kremlin from firing back. Jennifer Johnson has the latest.
Now back in Washington, the White House is clarifying an off-the-cuff remark U.S. President Joe Biden made during a speech in Poland, seeming to suggest it was time for the Russians to force President Vladimir Putin out.
For God's sake, this man cannot remain power.
The comments seem to be a direct call for regime change in Russia. White House officials were quick to clear up any confusion.
We do not have a strategy of regime change in Russia or anywhere else for that matter. It's up to the people of the country in question. It's up to the Russian people.
The president did extend an olive branch to the Russian people, telling them they are not the enemy. The Kremlin shot back, saying it's up to Russian citizens to elect their president. But under Putin's rule, elections have not been fair or free. His political opponents are often jailed or silenced, although some world leaders believe this war could cost Putin his job.
The Russian people, I think, are pretty fed up with what is happening in Ukraine, this illegal invasion, the destruction of their own livelihoods. Their economy is collapsing around them.
Before and during the war, the U.S. has repeatedly asked Putin to come to the negotiating table, find a diplomatic way out. While France's president is calling for this situation not to get out of control, others believe Putin won't forget what Biden said.
It will play on his mind, and it could complicate matters going down the road.
Still, others say Biden was just voicing the hopes of millions around the world.
I think many people will sympathize with the sentiments that led him to say what he did.
For now, the White House is sticking to its statement that the U.S. will not be involved in any regime change in Russia. Instead, the administration is moving ahead with its strategy of cutting off Putin, his billionaire backers, and the Russian economy from the rest of the world. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
Today, Pope Francis stepped up his calls for further negotiations to end the fighting in Ukraine. During his Sunday blessing, the Pope warned it's time to abolish war before war wipes out humanity. Since Russia invaded Ukraine over a month ago, Francis has criticized Moscow and condemned what he calls an unjustified aggression, but he has not cited Russia by name as the aggressor. And Pope Francis is getting ready to meet with Canadian Indigenous leaders who have now arrived in Rome for these historic meetings. The 32 delegates will push for an apology for the abusive residential school system in Canada, run largely by the Catholic Church. Global's Neethu Garcha is in Rome tonight. Neethu?
Dallas, there are delegates who had never left Canada before this, and some say coming to another country, let alone meeting with the head of the Catholic Church to advocate for tangible change for their people, is both overwhelming and a source of optimism all at once.
Unbelievable. I don't know, like I'm in a daze.
This will be a watershed week in the effort to advance reconciliation. That's what one of the delegates said about the hopeful impact of this trip shortly after touching down in Rome with a group of more than 60 others from Canada. 32 of them are delegates from First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities. The rest are their family members, close friends, staff, and mental health support workers. They arrived shortly before Pope Francis gave his regular weekly address. There was no mention of the Indigenous delegation traveling here to meet him, but as he gave this speech, the kind he's often used in past years to emphasize the importance of listening, his chance to truly practice what he preaches begins on Monday. Delegates will make multiple asks to support long-term healing, including a formal apology for the residential school system that left a lasting legacy of trauma and violent racism amounting to genocide, according to a 2019 inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Now elders like Angie Creer will share their stories, inevitably showcasing their strength at a time of reckoning when more people than ever before are listening.
Nobody wanted us. Oh, the white don't want you, then nothing. Indian don't want you, nobody wants you. Nobody will ever belong to anyone. I got news for them. I have an identity. I belong to the Métis Nation of Alberta.
Two of the three groups, the Inuit and Métis, will have separate morning sit-downs with the Pontiff on Monday. It marks the start of the largest ever delegation from Canada to Vatican City for private meetings with Pope Francis. For many, their healing hinges on not only being heard, but also what happens after this trip. Dallas?
Neethu Garcha in Rome, thanks. A 24-hour crisis line is available to support residential school survivors. The number is toll-free and you can speak in confidence. That number is 1-800-721-0066. It has been decades since one of Canada's largest sex abuse scandals was exposed at the Mount Castle Orphanage for Boys in Newfoundland and Labrador. More than 100 boys were physically and sexually abused by members of the Christian Brothers who were hired by the Catholic Church. Many of those boys, who are now elderly men, are only now receiving compensation. And as Ross Lord reports, the Catholic Church is looking at a unique source to help make the payments.
When a Chase the Ace lottery raised almost $6 million for maintaining their Catholic Church, people in the St. John's neighborhood of Goulds had no way of knowing this feel-good story might turn out bad. The proceeds could be earmarked for a different purpose, compensating victims of physical and sexual abuse at the Mount Castle Orphanage. A tough sell to parishioners.
I don't think it should be used for that. I think it should go to what it was intended for.
I don't think that we, the people of the Goulds, or anybody else who participated in such an event, should be responsible to pay for the victims.
After its liability for the abuse was confirmed last year, the Catholic Episcopal Corporation of St. John's has been scrambling for ways to pay claims that could run into the tens of millions of dollars. The Chase the Ace windfall would help.
The situation is pretty unusual. In fact, I would say it's unprecedented in this entire country.
The Episcopal Corporation has also filed for creditor protection, listing 19 church properties that could be sold off, including a local landmark, the Basilica of St. John the Baptist. In a statement delivered to churchgoers during weekend Mass, Archbishop Peter Hunt confirmed the court approved a sale by tender process for the major church properties in the greater St. John's area, including the Basilica and some cemeteries. A peculiar offshoot of an abuse scandal that's dragged on for decades.
It's been quite a struggle over many years that has had strange detours. The Chase the Ace one is one of the stranger ones, but here we are.
With an awkward court battle looming, there's been another surprise, a settlement.
A resolution was reached whereby some of the millions of dollars in that Chase the Ace account will be paid to St. Kevin's Parish.
The rest of the money will go to the victims, although the amounts are being kept a secret. Other legal and financial hurdles remain, and an even bigger challenge is moving past the Mount Castle scandal once and for all.
The social and emotional aspects of it are not going to be resolved anytime soon, if ever.
The lingering damage from a devastating chapter in Newfoundland history. Ross Lord, Global News.
Search crews combing the debris field of last week's China Eastern plane crash that killed all 132 people on board have recovered the second black box. The flight data recorder was found 40 meters from the plane's point of impact, buried more than a meter underground. The cockpit voice recorder was retrieved on Wednesday. Recovering both black boxes increases the chance investigators will be able to determine the cause of the crash. Footage shows the Boeing-made 737 nosediving before slamming into a mountainside in southern China on Monday, leaving a 20-meter crater in the ground. In the U.S., Colorado fire crews battling a fast-moving wildfire threatening lives on the outskirts of Boulder are gaining ground. Evacuation orders were lifted today after the wildfire burned within 900 meters of homes, forcing some 19,000 residents to flee the area on Saturday. The site of the wildfire is near the scene of a destructive blaze that destroyed more than 1,000 homes back in December. Going back to the table, Ukraine and Russia will meet again next week. How hopeful anyone is for mediation as leaders in and outside of NATO try and bridge the gap in this war. A historic summit hosted by Israel involving top diplomats from the U.S. and 4 Arab League countries got underway today. It's the first time foreign ministers from the UAE, Morocco and Bahrain will meet their Israeli counterpart in his home country. Egypt, a longtime peace partner of Israel, is also there for the talks, which are aimed at realigning relations among Middle Eastern powers accelerated by the war in Ukraine. Ukrainian officials say they will once again hold in-person meetings with a Russian delegation next week, although it remains unclear where those talks will take place. Negotiations between the two sides have so far gotten nowhere, despite offers and efforts from other countries to mediate. As Redmond Shannon takes a look at which nations may be in the best place to help broker a truce as the war marches on into its second month.
Vladimir Putin's long meeting table was both comic and tragic, an illustration of the diplomatic distance between Russia and the West in the lead-up to the invasion. The pre-war efforts of France's Emmanuel Macron came to nothing, despite years of French involvement in peace talks for the breakaway portion of the Donbass region, which Russia recognized as independent before launching its Ukraine invasion. Still, he continues to engage with Putin.
I think it's useful for the Americans, actually, for other Europeans to have at least one leader that is in contact with Mr. Putin, even if on the surface there might be some tensions there.
Another NATO member attempting mediation is Turkey, hosting a summit between Ukraine and Russia's foreign ministers 2 weeks ago. Turkey has a complex relationship with Russia. It has not imposed sanctions, but it has restricted Black Sea access to Russian warships. At Thursday's NATO summit, Turkish President Erdogan was eager to stress NATO poses no direct threat to Russia, but Turkey has sold drones to Ukraine.
Turkey has deep economic interests here, deep political engagement. I think the Ukrainians trust Turkey, and after all, they have hosted already a senior-level meeting.
A possible mediator outside NATO is Israel. Prime Minister Naftali Bennett visited Putin in Moscow this month. Bennett says it's his moral duty to help. Israel and Russia have common enemies in the war in Syria, and it has strong ties to Jewish diasporas in both Russia and Ukraine. Putin claimed the invasion was to denazify Ukraine, but it has forced thousands of Jews to flee.
How we can bring about a ceasefire?
Pakistan's leader Imran Khan has suggested Islamic countries and China get involved, likely unappealing to Vladimir Zelensky because many of those nations abstained from a UN resolution condemning the invasion. Ukraine's president insists he wants to meet with Putin.
Zelensky will go into this very hemmed in because there's no way he can agree to many of the concessions that we know Russia is putting forth, giving recognition of Crimea as Russian territory, recognition of the Donbass.
For now, it appears guns, missiles and bombs are doing all the talking. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
The world is watching, and the Vatican knows it. Ahead, how the push for an official papal apology from Canada's Indigenous delegation could be seen around the world. When Indigenous leaders meet with Pope Francis this week, they will be looking to get a long-awaited apology from the Catholic Church for its role in Canada's abusive residential school system. As Crystal Gamansing reports, experts are divided as to whether those demands will finally be met.
Assimilation to white society, colonialism that robbed generations of Indigenous children of their basic right to exist, a theft of dignity and culture. After decades of harm, First Nations, Inuit and Métis people are again looking to the Roman Catholic Church to make amends.
They want to use that moment justifiably and see the Vatican as a symbol of Western culture, of Western domination, of colonialism, of the white race, basically.
Professor of Theology Massimo Fagioli says he will be closely following the meetings Indigenous delegates will have with Pope Francis in the days ahead.
It has a global meaning, and this is why the Vatican has, I believe, studied this request and this opportunity carefully, because they knew that it was much bigger than a local Catholic or national issue.
Last year, the world's eyes opened to the atrocities Indigenous people suffered in Canada when hundreds of unmarked graves were discovered in British Columbia and Saskatchewan. A galvanizing social justice moment and rallying cry that every child matters. Pope Benedict XVI previously expressed sorrow for the deplorable abuses that took place in residential schools. His successor, Pope Francis, expressed a similar statement. Neither one said sorry. Michelle Good says words matter.
I think that the only time an apology is going to come is if the Catholic Church feels that it's backed into a corner.
Good is the daughter of a survivor, an award-winning author and former lawyer who fought for compensation for survivors.
When they're there, I hope that the Indigenous people that go will take a tour of the Vatican Museum. And I hope that they look at Nero's bathtub, which has been valued at $60 billion. And all the church would have to do is give up Nero's bathtub and they could compensate survivors royally.
32 survivors, knowledge keepers, and elders will meet with the Pope. Each has their own view of success, but the world is watching. Crystal Gamancin, Global News, London.
Canada's men's soccer team made history tonight, punching its ticket to the 2022 World Cup in front of a home crowd in Toronto. The atmosphere outside and inside BMO Stadium, nothing short of electric. Thousands of fans showing up in full force, chanting and cheering on Canada's men's team, which will play in a World Cup for the first time since 1986 after beating Jamaica 4-0. We'll be cheering them on at that World Cup. That is Global National for this Sunday night. I'm Dallas Flexhog. And tonight we leave you with more jubilant scenes from the World Cup qualifier in Toronto. Congratulations to Canada's men's team. And for those of you watching at home, thanks for watching. Have a good night.